It's not my fault!
Onion!
It's not my fault!
The sound of glass meeting glass cut through the air like a small explosion. High above New York City, inside a restaurant lined with gold light and polished marble, a dinner for the world's powerful was in motion. Laughter rose like music from people in tailored suits and glittering dresses. Cameras flashed. A jazz trio played softly in the corner. Everything looked perfect, until it wasn't. At the center table sat Victor Lin, a billionaire tech CEO from California, known for building empires out of code and charm. Tonight his smile gleamed under chandelier light. Around him sat bankers, investors, and diplomats, each waiting for his next clever remark. He lifted his crystal glass. "To progress," he said in English, then added something quietly in Mandarin, fast, sharp, confident. The waitress standing beside him, Ava Johnson, caught the words. She had heard that tone before, smooth on the surface, cutting underneath. The laughter that followed told her what it meant, even before her mind translated it. He was mocking her, using a language he believed she couldn't understand. She didn't flinch. The tray in her hands stayed steady, though her pulse began to climb. Around them, the room sparkled with careless luxury, wine swirling in crystal, shoes clicking on marble, the low hum of money talking to itself. Victor leaned back, proud of his private joke. His words, disguised as a compliment, had been an insult, comparing her presence to a decoration that didn't fit the room. His companions chuckled politely, pretending not to understand but knowing enough to enjoy his confidence. Ava set down another glass, the rim catching the chandelier's reflection. For a moment her eyes met his, calm, focused. Then she spoke in his own language, but not the polished city version. Her voice carried the rolling sounds of his home dialect, soft but unmistakable. "Funny," she said evenly, still in Mandarin. "Your words don't fit this room either." The air froze, the laughter stopped mid-breath. One of the bankers coughed, another lowered his phone. Even the music seemed to stumble before finding its rhythm again. Victor's smile stiffened, then vanished. His fork slipped against the plate with a small metallic tap that echoed far louder than it should have. In that pause, something shifted. The invisible line that separated those who command from those who serve was suddenly gone. The billionaire and the waitress stood on level ground, joined by the same tongue, the one he had tried to hide behind. Ava didn't move. She simply finished pouring the champagne, each bubble rising like a countdown. Around her, no one dared speak. Outside, through the glass walls, the city blinked with 1,000 windows, somewhere between beauty and judgment. A camera flash caught her face for an instant. Someone would post it later. The internet would do the rest. But in this moment, only silence mattered. Victor blinked, searching for a response, but none came. He had spent years perfecting accents, polishing words, and buying control. Yet all his wealth couldn't buy back this second of exposure. Ava gathered the empty tray against her chest, nodded politely, and stepped away. Each movement was exact, unhurried, professional. Her footsteps clicked across the marble floor, light yet final. The table remained still, glasses half raised, as if unsure whether to toast or apologize. Somewhere in the distance, the jazz band began a new song, slow, uncertain. Human. Victor's hand trembled slightly as he lifted his drink again. But the crystal glass didn't ring this time, it only whispered. And in that whisper, everyone at the table heard it, the sound of power cracking. The CEO's smirk faltered, silence like glass about to crack. The silence did not end when the music started again. It followed every breath in the restaurant, like a ghost that refused to leave. Forks clinked against plates too carefully. Conversation shrank to whispers. The laughter from a few minutes ago was gone, buried under unease. Amara Collins stood near the kitchen door, tray pressed to her chest. Her uniform smelled faintly of citrus and detergent, the scent that now made her feel trapped between duty and disbelief. The faces around her, chefs, waiters, bartenders, were full of quiet shock. None spoke, but their eyes asked the same question. What happens now? At the far end of the room, Li Cheng sat motionless. His charm had drained away. He kept his jaw tight, his hands still as if any movement might admit weakness. The men beside him scrolled on their phones, pretending interest in screens that had already recorded what they saw. The manager, a thin man with too much worry in his posture, rushed to Amara. "Don't say anything," he whispered. "We'll handle this privately," but his voice shook. He knew this could not stay private. Someone had already lifted a phone the moment silence fell. The flash had caught more than light. It had caught truth. Amara nodded, wordless. She still felt the weight of Li Cheng's stare. It was not rage exactly. It was calculation. The look of a man who had been exposed and was now rewriting the moment in his head, turning it into something he could control later. When her shift ended, she walked through the staff hallway where laughter and kitchen noise usually spilled. Tonight, even the refrigerator's hum sounded too loud. She placed her apron in the laundry bin and stood for a second under the flickering light. Her hands trembled slightly, then stilled. She had done nothing wrong, but somehow the world outside already felt ready to decide for her. Li Cheng's driver waited in the private elevator lobby. The CEO's reflection glared back at him from the mirrored walls, cold, uncertain, human. "Find out who recorded it," he said quietly. The driver nodded. The elevator doors closed like a pair of iron lips sealing a secret that would not stay hidden. By midnight, that secret was already leaving the building, somewhere in a quiet apartment. A guest who had filmed the exchange sat on the edge of a bed, replaying the video. The camera shook slightly, but the sound was clear. Li Cheng's voice in Mandarin, then Amara's reply in his hometown dialect. The silence that followed felt larger than the room itself. The guest hesitated, thumb hovering over the upload button. In the video, Amara's face showed calm. Not anger, not pride, just steady truth. It was that look that made the guest decide. The screen blinked once, then again, uploading. Outside, the city slept under sheets of mist and neon. Taxi lights crossed wet pavement like streaks of gold. In the penthouse above, Li Cheng stared out the window at the skyline he believed he ruled. His reflection in the glass didn't smile back. Down in a quiet apartment across the city, Amara sat by her window, sipping tea she didn't taste. She didn't know what had already begun, what millions would soon see. She only knew the air finally felt lighter. On the internet, a new post appeared with no name attached. The video played in perfect silence, ending with a caption written in simple words, "Respect speaks every language." The video did not spread like gossip, it spread like fire. By morning, the clip had crossed oceans. English captions blinked beneath Chinese characters. Different languages carried the same silence, the moment when a billionaire was left speechless by a waitress who spoke his tongue better than his pride. At first, people called it justice. Comment sections filled with applause emojis and short phrases like "respect won tonight." Then came the threads, the debates, the think pieces. What had begun as a single moment of truth was now a war of opinions. From a dark office in California, Li Cheng's public relations team huddled around glowing screens. "We need to move fast," said the communications director. A draft apology blinked on her laptop. "We regret the misunderstanding and hold deep respect for all individuals." Every word was measured, polished, and hollow. They debated whether to use the phrase cultural miscommunication. In the end, they did. The statement went live at noon. It was received like cold metal, too smooth to hold meaning. Some praised it. Others tore it apart. Memes appeared. Commenters dissected Li's accent, his gestures, even the way he held his fork. The internet became a courtroom without walls. Across the city, Amara Collins sat at her kitchen table, watching her phone buzz itself across the counter. Message requests piled in. Journalists, talk shows, activists, brand ambassadors, everyone wanted her to speak, to retell the story that was no longer hers. Her inbox glowed like a swarm of moths. One message said, "You're an inspiration." Another said, "We can make this bigger." And buried between them, one from an unknown sender. "They will twist this." Stay silent. She didn't reply to any of them. She made coffee, stared out the window, and watched snow drift past the city skyline. Somewhere a siren wailed, sharp, fading gone. The world moved on, but her name kept trending. Meanwhile, the clip reached Beijing, London, Lagos. Commentators translated her words again and again until their meaning bent. Some called her brave. Others called her rude. Some turned the moment into jokes, gifs, and ad slogans. Hashtags rose and fell like waves. "Schon respect speaks." "Schon CEO's Waitress." "Dialect of dignity." By nightfall, the story no longer belonged to either of them. It belonged to the feed. Analysts broke it down frame by frame, explaining the cultural nuance of the dialect. A viral tweet declared, "She didn't just speak his language, she spoke his truth." Another post mocked her tone, calling it staged. In the endless scroll, morality became entertainment. Lee Chung watched the chaos from his penthouse. Screens reflected across his glasses, multiplying his own face 100 times. "Turn off the comments," he told his assistant, though he kept reading them long after. Each word felt smaller than the next, each insult louder. His empire, worth billions, was now reduced to a single 30-second video on repeat. In a quiet corner of the city, Amara powered down her phone. The light vanished from her face. She had refused every interview. The world wanted her voice, but only to fill the silence between advertisements. She sat at her kitchen table, the mug cooling beside her, and opened her social media app one last time. Notifications flooded the screen. Likes, shares, strangers debating her life as if it were a public trial. The video replayed automatically. She saw her own calm expression, her steady voice, the silence that followed. Then she saw the captions, the edits, the jokes. Her thumb hovered over the delete icon. The app asked, "Are you sure?" She whispered to the empty room, "They've turned it into a show." Then she pressed delete. Words build bridges, or walls. Years before the night at the restaurant, Amara Collins sat in a small college classroom surrounded by dictionaries and sound charts. She was 23, studying linguistics at a state university, obsessed with the way tone could change meaning. She believed that language carried a kind of moral gravity. How you spoke revealed how you saw the world. Her professor once said, "Language is power disguised as kindness." Amara never forgot that line. She had dreamed of teaching, maybe researching endangered dialects. But when her mother's health declined, tuition gave way to medical bills. Amara dropped out quietly, took work wherever she could. Cafes, catering, finally a restaurant job that paid just enough. She told herself it was temporary. Yet every night she still practiced sounds under her breath, repeating syllables from around the world like prayers she didn't want to forget. To her, dialects were living things, proof that people mattered even when they were unseen. On the other side of the world, long before he became a billionaire, Lee Chung was a boy in a crowded village in Sichuan. His home had one cracked radio and no doors that closed properly. He loved numbers because they didn't judge his accent. At school, his classmates mocked his thick rural tones. Once a teacher told him that people in cities spoke correctly, and he believed her. He practiced new words in secret, forcing his tongue to flatten and stretch until his old voice disappeared. When he won a scholarship to a university in Beijing, he promised himself he would never sound small again. But each success made him more afraid of the past. When business took him to America, he polished his English the same way. Perfect grammar, perfect tone, no trace of where he came from. He built companies, gave speeches, and learned to smile with control. Yet deep down, he still feared the echo of the boy he had buried, the one who spoke in a dialect others laughed at. So when Amara replied to him that night, not in the language of power but in the sound of his childhood, it hit him like a mirror he didn't want to see. Language had betrayed him. Now, in the days after the scandal, Amara and Lee Chung lived inside the same silence, miles apart. She spent her evenings at home, a worn notebook open beside her tea. In it, she listed phrases from different dialects she had once studied, each word meaning dignity, in a different tongue. She whispered them softly, her voice steady, reclaiming the beauty she had almost lost. Across the ocean in his penthouse, Lee Cheng stood before a mirror rehearsing an apology. The PR script on the table read, "We value diversity and mutual understanding." The words were flawless, but they didn't sound like him. He tried again, slower, louder, but every syllable felt heavy, like a foreign object in his mouth. He didn't believe what he was saying, and the mirror seemed to know it. In that same moment, Amara repeated a line from his dialect with quiet confidence, her voice rising and falling like home. He tightened his tie. She exhaled. The same air carried two sounds, one trying to hide its truth, one trying to honor it. Parallel montage, Amara's voice, measured, alive, free. Li Cheng's rehearsed words, polished, empty, breaking. Two people bound by the same truth. Language remembers what pride forgets. Truth has reflections and none of them lie. The elevator doors slid open with a soft hiss. Amara Collins stepped into a hallway lined with glass. Every surface reflected some version of her, each one calm, composed, but smaller than she felt inside. A receptionist guided her toward the conference room where 3 executives waited, suits crisp, expressions measured. They called it a clarification meeting. She understood what it really was, a warning dressed as procedure. The restaurant had become a war zone of whispers since the viral clip. Reporters camped outside. Calls came from legal teams, sponsors, and even the city's business council. Inside, people spoke in half sentences, afraid that any word might leak. The restaurant's reputation, once built on silence and service, now lived under a magnifying glass. Amara walked past mirrored walls that made the corridor seem endless. Her footsteps sounded louder than they should have, each one echoing back like a question. Who owns the truth? Inside the conference room, the air was cold. The blinds were drawn halfway, letting only thin lines of daylight across the polished table. 3 executives sat across from her, a lawyer, the HR director, and the restaurant manager who wouldn't meet her eyes. A recorder blinked red in the center of the table. "Miss Collins," the lawyer began smoothly, "we appreciate you coming in. We just need your account so we can protect everyone involved." Protect, she thought. That word always meant control. They asked her to describe what happened that night. Each question was careful, wrapped in politeness. What tone did Mr. Lee use? Do you believe it was a misunderstanding? Could your response have been interpreted as unprofessional? Amara listened, then answered clearly. His words were deliberate. Her voice didn't shake. "He used his language to make me feel small." The lawyer nodded, typing. "And your reply?" "I used the same language," she said, "to remind him that understanding is not a privilege." The manager shifted uncomfortably. The HR director leaned forward. "Miss Collins," she said, lowering her voice, "we understand emotions were high." But repeating his words could be seen as provocation. Amara turned her gaze to the wall behind them. The mirror reflected their faces, 3 people rehearsing concern while fearing exposure. She spoke again, slower this time. "You want me to say it wasn't intentional, but I know what I heard." They exchanged glances. The lawyer tried a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Perhaps you could demonstrate exactly what was said. So we have it on record?" Amara hesitated for half a breath. Then she stood facing the mirrored wall. Her reflection looked back, steady. In clear, precise Mandarin, she repeated the words Li Cheng had used that night. The dialect rolled out perfectly. The rural tones of his childhood, unsoftened, undeniable. The room fell silent. The executives froze, unsure whether to take notes or apologize. When she finished, her reflection was the only one that seemed unafraid. "No one laughed this time," she said quietly, and sat down. The meeting ended in strained politeness. They thanked her, promised to follow up, and escorted her to the elevator. The mirrored doors closed again, sealing her reflection into silence. Hours later, the world saw her words anyway. Someone inside the room had leaked the transcript. Every line appeared online exactly as she'd spoken it, in Mandarin, English, and the dialect Lee had tried to forget. And for the second time, truth spoke his language. Power has no sound until it starts to crack. The meeting room sat high above the city. Glass walls, marble table, a skyline trapped in morning haze. Li Cheng stood at one end, his reflection doubled in every window. Behind him, the company logo glowed in silver letters, Lenovo Global. A symbol of success, or today, accusation. Every seat around the table was filled. Board members from 3 continents stared down at printed reports. Share values dropping, sponsorships freezing, customers withdrawing. On each page was the same cause written in soft corporate terms. Public trust event. None dared call it what it was, humiliation. Lee adjusted his tie. "This is a misunderstanding," he began, his voice low but steady. The clip was taken out of context. "I was joking. Nothing more." His words floated into the cold air and fell flat. A projector screen flickered on, displaying headlines in 2 languages. CEO's words ignite global debate. Respect speaks every language. Below it, Amara's calm face filled the screen, captured mid-sentence. No sound was needed. Everyone in the room already knew what she had said. A few chairs creaked. One man cleared his throat. The company's legal advisor leaned forward, speaking carefully. With all respect, Mr. Lee, context is meaningless when millions have already decided the meaning for you. Lee forced a smile. They don't understand Chinese culture. Sir, said another board member from London. Your own dialect was the issue. That line cut deeper than any headline. For a moment, Lee saw himself not as the man on magazine covers, but as the boy from his village again, barefoot, mocked for his accent. He had built this empire to erase that sound, to replace shame with authority, but the dialect had found him anyway, spoken by someone he thought powerless. The youngest board member, a woman from Guangzhou, broke the silence. Do you know why people care about this story? She asked. Lee looked at her, unsure how to answer. It's not about the restaurant, she said. It's about how language reveals who we truly are. You wanted to sound above others. She wanted to sound equal. And the world chose her. Her voice was calm, but her words hit like a verdict. On the table, a graph displayed the company's plunging numbers. Millions lost overnight. Investors demanded action. A resignation would steady the market. A scapegoat would save the brand. The legal advisor folded his hands. The board must vote on leadership confidence. Lee exhaled, realizing that control, his lifelong obsession, was slipping away. He turned back to the window, where the city's reflection blurred with his own. The skyline looked like a cage built from light. He tried one last argument. You think removing me will fix this? She humiliated me in public. I gave her a job. The young board member interrupted softly. She gave you something greater, he blinked. What? She gave you honesty. The room fell still again. She held his gaze. You taught machines to listen for profit. She taught the world to listen for truth. The words lingered. They didn't feel like praise, they felt like closure. One by one, the board members raised their hands. No shouting, no debate, just the quiet rhythm of consequence. When it was done, Lee stood motionless. His title was gone, but his reflection remained, unchanged, unblinking, empty. Outside, a gust of wind rattled the glass wall, and the silver company logo trembled slightly. The young woman gathered her papers, paused at the door, and turned back to him. You taught the world to listen, she said gently. Then she left, and the sound of her footsteps was the only thing the empire had left. Light filled the room like truth that didn't need to shout. Weeks had passed since the headlines cooled and the hashtags moved on. The noise outside faded, but the story remained, quiet, alive, waiting to be remembered properly. Amara Collins sat in her small apartment, the kind of place built for working hours, not rest. The walls were pale, the furniture plain. On the coffee table sat a folded newspaper with her picture on it, though the headline didn't match the person in the room. She had agreed to one interview, just one, for a documentary about modern dignity. The camera stood still. The microphone above her caught every breath. The interviewer, a young woman with tired eyes, sat just out of frame. Can you tell us, she asked softly, what it felt like that night? Amara thought for a long moment. The sunlight touched her hands as she spoke. It felt like the air froze, she said. But it wasn't fear. It was clarity. Like everything false suddenly disappeared. The interviewer nodded, her pen motionless. They called you brave, she said. Do you see it that way? Amara shook her head. Not brave, just awake. People think power is loud, but truth, real truth, is usually quiet. It just stands there and waits for someone to notice. The camera whirred softly, recording every syllable. Do you think you changed anything? Amara smiled faintly. Maybe not the world, but maybe one conversation. Maybe one person will think before using words to shrink someone else. That's enough for me. She leaned forward, her voice calm, almost teacher-like. Language isn't just words. It's tone. It's intention. You can say the right sentence and still be cruel, or say nothing and still show respect. The interviewer's throat tightened. She had covered scandals, protests, and corporate downfalls. But not this kind of stillness, Amara continued. People wanted to make me a symbol, but I'm just someone who heard something wrong and answered in the only way I could. Dignity isn't a performance. It's a tone you carry, even when no one's listening. Outside, a car passed, its sound fading into silence. The camera light blinked red. The interviewer looked down, pretending to adjust her notes. You said in an earlier message that you study language. What does this whole thing mean to you now as a linguist? Amara thought again, eyes steady. Words can build walls or open doors. I've learned that the most powerful sentences are the ones that remind us we're equal. She paused. Dignity, she said slowly, is not a language, it's a tone. The room fell still. The interviewer didn't speak. She simply nodded, swallowing hard. The camera clicked off. Amara stood and crossed the room to the counter where her apron lay. She folded it neatly, one edge meeting the other. The creases sharp and perfect, each line deliberate, like punctuation marking the end of a sentence that didn't need to be rewritten. Outside, sunlight lingered on the window pane. Inside, silence said everything that words could not. The train slid into the valley like a blade of steel cutting through memory. After months of noise, news, outrage, apology statements, and board meetings, Li Cheng returned to the one place that had no use for his titles, his hometown in Sichuan. The air here smelled of rain and soil, not perfume and glass. The hills rose like quiet witnesses, unchanged by his rise or fall. He stepped off the platform with a small suitcase. No reporters, no cameras, only wind carrying the sound of dialects that once embarrassed him. They flowed from every direction. Vendors at the market, old men playing chess, children laughing near puddles. The same tones he had buried under years of polished speech now surrounded him like a language he had forgotten how to love. He walked down the main street, passing a noodle shop he used to visit as a boy. The owner's son, now grown, recognized him but said nothing. People glanced, whispered. Fame had turned into something quieter now. Curiosity mixed with distance. At the village edge stood a small hill dotted with gravestones. He climbed slowly, the dust clinging to his shoes. There, under a crooked tree, rested the stone with his mother's name. The carving had faded, but the shape of it was familiar, like her voice used to be. He knelt beside it, setting down a single white flower. For a long moment he said nothing. Then softly, in the dialect he had erased from his own mouth, he whispered, "Ma, I forgot where I came from." The wind moved through the trees as if to answer. Down the hill, a group of children played with sticks, pretending to film each other. Their voices carried upward, mocking, innocent. One of them raised an imaginary phone and said in Mandarin, "Respect speaks every language." Another laughed, mimicking his accent. They didn't see him watching. For a heartbeat, shame flared, the old reflex of pride defending itself. But it faded just as quickly. He realized they weren't cruel. They were curious. To them, the story was a lesson, not a wound. He walked toward them slowly. The children froze, unsure if they'd gone too far. Li smiled faintly, lowering himself to their level. "You said it wrong," he told them gently in their dialect. "It sounds like this." He repeated the phrase not as correction but as gift. His tone carried warmth, not authority. The children grinned, repeating after him. Laughter returned to the air, real this time. For the first time in years, Li felt the sound of his own speech without disguise. He stood again, looking across the valley where fields shimmered in the afternoon light. A bird called somewhere beyond the hills, a clear, echoing note that rose and fell, older than shame, older than pride. The call lingered in the silence that followed. Li Cheng closed his eyes. He thought of the boardroom, the mirrored walls, the voice that once betrayed him, and then he thought of the woman who had answered him in his own language, reminding him that truth doesn't belong to power. It belongs to those who speak it without fear. He whispered one last line to the wind. "The dialect pure and steady, I hear you now," the bird called again. The hills answered softly, and the narrator's voice closed like a quiet bell. In the end, every empire of arrogance falls to a single syllable spoken with truth.